This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Tonight, the real screening process. Not only will Supreme Court nominee Sonia Sotomayor face Senate confirmation on TV, she'll have to weather a torrent of critical web videos. We'll have a preview. Also tonight, wounded warriors reaching out to vets via the net. And later in the hour, information overload, how texting, email, Facebook, and Twitter all make us, no, not hyper, but something worse.
To make room for this new information, the brain is forced to delete all the old data it spent a lifetime compiling. So the very information meant to inform us is actually making us stupid.
Tonight, learning to focus by filtering. But first, here are this week's online video picks. Number one, want to know what it's like to actually be a Guantanamo detainee? Now you can on the website Second Life, where your second self, your avatar, is sentenced to stay there. This is from Fora TV.
Dogs barking at naked prisoners while loud music is being fired into their ears. People are being taunted with pictures of their children, saying that you're never going to see them again. The screams of women are being used to break detainees' wills.
The man speaking here is British national Moazzam Begg. He spent almost 3 years in the infamous prison before he was released in 2005. In her 2004 documentary Unconstitutional, writer-director Noni de la Peña used footage of Moazzam's father reading his son's letters from Guantanamo.
I've been kept like an animal in a cage. They don't give me food. There is no one to help me.
Under the Second Life name Noni Ryder, de la Peña is behind the Gone Gitmo project, situated on a rooftop on IML Island. The sim is run by the Interactive Media Division at USC School of Cinematic Arts. Noni is convinced that the issues surrounding Guantanamo can be brought much closer to home via Second Life.
There's a sense of the reality to it. So when your avatar goes into a cage, it's a very visceral feeling, beyond watching it in a film, beyond reading about it in the paper. Geography doesn't matter.
With a grant from the Bay Area Video Coalition, Noni and USC visiting Professor Peggy Weil used famous builder Bubba Fairchild to create interactive Guantanamo.
Guantanamo is physically off limits to most citizens and press. Keep a topic out of sight and it stays out of mind. So in the face of a real but inaccessible destination, we felt that Second Life offered us a chance to build an accessible, albeit virtual, version.
De la Peña and Weil also realized they would have to deal carefully with the implications of depicting questionable interrogation practices.
We do not torture your avatar. So rather than a torture chamber, we elected to build a contemplation chamber, a series of spaces to contemplate the reports of practices going on in Guantanamo, as well as the current news via RSS feed.
Video pick number 2 this week is also about Gitmo detainees, but it needs some historical context. In 1964, President Lyndon Johnson ran a campaign commercial claiming his opponent, Barry Goldwater, might get us into a nuclear war. Here is that very famous 30-second spot.
8, 9, 9. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live.
Chilling, right? Now remember that girl, and here is a brand new online political ad from the Republican Party attacking President Obama's idea of moving some Guantanamo detainees to super secure prisons in the United States.
To close it, not.
Guantanamo, that's easy. Close down Guantanamo.
To close it, not.
I don't believe they should come to the United States.
We will never allow terrorists to be released into the United States.
To close it, not.
We've made some hasty decisions that are now going to take some time to unwind. And closing Guantanamo Bay obviously is one of those decisions.
These are the stakes.
Guantanamo, that's easy. Close down Guantanamo.
Harry Reid against the president, I got. Democrat Jim Webb against the president, I got. But by using the Daisy Girl, did they mean to suggest that housing Gitmo detainees in America's securest prisons will result in a nuclear attack? But if that video was about a war imagined, video pick number 3 is about a war all too real and about our own unwitting role in that war. And heads up if you have a camcorder, there's a YouTube Video for Change contest in this disturbing piece.
You may not realize it, but your cell phone is fueling the deadliest war in the world. And it's all because of these. Your cell phone needs these minerals to work. Congo has them. Armed groups are at war to control the mines where they're found. Their weapon of choice? Rape. Hundreds of thousands of women have been raped in over a decade of fighting. Had enough? Then create a video that raises awareness about the link between our cell phones and the violence in the Congo. Get creative. It can be simple or elaborate. You can even use your cell phone to film it. Upload your video to the Come Clean for Congo YouTube contest page. Our panel of judges will pick the finalists. You decide the winner. If you win, we'll fly you to LA for a screening of your film at an entertainment industry event. Our cell phones don't have to fuel the deadliest war in the world. We can help end the fighting by pressuring the top electronics companies to stop using conflict minerals from the Congo. So grab a camera, make a video, challenge electronics companies to come clean for Congo.
In coming weeks, we hope to play some of the entries in the YouTube Video for Change contest on cell phones and the Congo War. So get to it. I would like to see a Brian Lehrer viewer win. Video pick number 4 comes from the Atlantic magazine site. It's about their cover story on what makes human beings truly happy. In this case, a group of male Harvard graduates who were followed for decades.
If you're going to study lives, you're going to study trees. Redwoods are a whole lot more interesting than saplings. The real payoff from the study has been watching how these men matured as they became parents, and then as they became grandparents, and most recently to demonstrate that aging is a lot less scary than people are afraid it is. To me, the studies that stand out are the ones when there was growth. So the fact that someone graduated brilliantly and normally from Harvard Law School and spent his last few years working in the post office because he was a chronic alcoholic doesn't have a lot of lesson in it. But the fact that a man could be humanly deprived by his parents so that he really had no companionship and no real sense of himself, and then felt so inadequate that he tried to kill himself. And he then, actually through becoming severely ill for a year and experiencing the care in the hospital as transformative, became a grown-up. He got married, he had children, he became a pillar of the church, he became beloved by a huge number of people.
That from the Atlantic magazine site. And video pick number 5 is a sampling of some fabulous photos of Harlem from a New York Times visual journalism site. Photographer Ozir Muhammad narrates some of his own work.
The House of Prayer on 125th Street was started by a very charismatic spiritual leader named Daddy Grace. Early August of every year, it's been going on for a long time, you can hear this wonderful trombone choir music, and also you can see people actually being baptized right out there on the street. And on this particular occasion, I saw a young man with a broken trombone pretending as though he was blowing it, about 8 or 9 years old, and I was just very lucky to take that picture. I thought it was just a wonderful moment. This was near the entrance to the Apollo Theater. I came across this gentleman named Dancing Harry. Mr. Harry, or Dancing Harry, put a little board on the ground, and he'd bring a tin can, and he would play music on a little boom box, James Brown music, and he would dance to the music. And the moves, his moves were James Brown's moves.
See more of that video at the New York Times new visual journalism site called Lens. And those are this week's online video picks. This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Less than 6 months into President Obama's term, a Supreme Court nominee. If the Senate approves, U.S. Appeals Court Judge Sonia Sotomayor from New York will become a justice of the Supreme Court, the first Latina. She is already facing the full force and long memories of blogs and web videos, another kind of confirmation battle. Joining us via Skype, Dahlia Lithwick, a senior editor at Slate.com, and Jenny Rivera in our studio, the director of the CUNY Law School Center on Latino and Latina Rights and Equality. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on. Dahlia, you wrote on Slate today about what you call the rational hysterics of the Republican attack on Sotomayor. You think they're going the route of attacking her on being too empathetic and that is not legal enough?
Well, in fairness, Brian, Obama opened the door on this, right? Obama introduced the language of empathy long before these attacks started. I think he was using it as a proxy for something that, yes, I confess is not legal enough. But I think that the attacks on her have very quickly escalated to attacks that are very, very weirdly race and gender-based. And it seems to me that there's this slight piece of hypocrisy that is that Clarence Thomas's up from the bootstraps narrative was considered a big plus for him. Something about Sotomayor's up from the bootstraps narrative looks to be very suspect to her critics. They say she's just not smart, she's clearly hysterical, and not worthy of this pick. So I think we have a little bit of a tension there between whose bootstraps count.
And we hear that very frequently with females in power, no matter what race or ethnicity they're from, that they tend to be too emotional, hysterical, and not smart enough.
Well, I think that's right. Look, a lot of this started with an unfortunate piece that Jeffrey Rosen did in
The New Republic.
The New Republic a few weeks ago, where he said, without great sources, that Sonia Sotomayor is just too aggressive on the bench. She's kind of a bully. She's a very, very tough questioner. Those are not things you ever hear about people on the Supreme Court, like John Roberts, who's very, very tough on the bench, or Nino Scalia. So I think you're quite right that these are sort of a class of complaints that seem to only be trotted out when people are not white men.
But Professor Rivera, the argument, the nut of the argument that's actually there, is that it's a Supreme Court justice's job to defend the Constitution, not to decide which side in a case is more worthy of empathy, however we define that word. Do you dispute that interpretation?
I don't dispute the point that it's certainly the role of judges and the justices on the Supreme Court to look at the facts in the case, assess the law that needs to be applied, determine what the standard is and apply it in the case. I think it's unfair, though, to look at what the president has said and what Judge Sotomayor has said and read into that means she's going to give greater sympathy to one side over another. I think what both of them have been talking about is this other side, these other characteristics that distinguish the nominee, because the primary concern is, of course, the intellect, right? The ability to handle the complex legal issues, the intelligence, and she's extraordinary. She's brilliant. Everyone recognizes this. There's no way to assail her on that. So then what have you got left? It's the rest of this, well, is she going to be more sympathetic to one side or the other because of this life history and her experience? I think what both of them are referring to is that this is what distinguishes who you are, the way you come to a case and what you think of those issues.
Well, I don't think anybody argues that where you come from affects how you see the world. But there are some things that she herself has said that makes some people wonder about her relationship to that. So, for example, the early response to Sotomayor from the right includes that the traditional tale of the liberal activist judge is in play here for them. Unlike the usual story, however, Sotomayor was immortalized on tape at Duke University in 2005, revealing what her opponents are calling her activist tendencies.
All of the legal defense funds out there, they're looking for people with Court of Appeals experience, because Court of Appeals is where policy is made. And I know this is on tape, and I should never say that because we don't make law. I know. Okay, I know. I'm not promoting it, and I'm not advocating it. Okay.
Dahlia Lithwick, does the Court of Appeals make policy?
Brian, this is what my former editor-in-chief Michael Kinsley called a classic gaffe, right? Which is when you say something inadvertently that is absolutely true and everyone knows to be true. So Judge Sotomayor said something in that tape which everybody knows to be true, which is, of course, the courts of appeals make policy, of course, and she was distinguishing it from the district courts. She was talking to people who were trying to think through whether they wanted a clerkship on the district court or the Court of Appeals, and all she was saying was, of course we make policy. Every time a judge decides a complicated case, they make policy. What's really interesting here is the sort of flare-up of, oh my God, she must be an activist because she's advocating making policy. But in fact, I don't think anyone would dispute that of course that's what happens, that's what courts do, and her real sin here was that not only did she say it, but then she said, oh, I wish I hadn't said it on tape.
And then somebody would have to make the case, and I don't think anybody's made it yet, that by saying those words, she was declaring her practice of using the Court of Appeals to make policy any more than any other judge.
And that's the paradox. I mean, if you wade through Judge Sotomayor's opinions, which, there are hundreds of them. This is not David Souter. This is not John Roberts. This is someone with an enormous paper trail. There is absolutely not a scintilla of evidence that this is someone who has used the bench to make policy. She has been the most narrow, humble, careful, small, get in, get out reader of the law. I mean, nobody I think would say that she has some vision or some agenda she's pushing. So of all people to be the spokesperson for courts making policy, she's actually a sort of strange choice.
Which, in her experience, I mean, as you say, this is why they're using her statements against her rather than her actual rulings from the bench for that, for this argument. You were a clerk once upon a time to Judge Sotomayor?
Yes, when she was on the district court in '93.
So when she was doing trial court work?
Correct.
And did she seem to be salivating at that time to get onto the Court of Appeals so she could make policy?
No, that's absolutely not the case. She was not salivating to get on the Court of Appeals to make policy. And as has already been said by many people, of course, that statement is out of context, and there's a lot more that she does say after that. Not only is it sort of, again, this inaccuracy of what Judge Sotomayor meant and what everyone understands that goes on in the Court of Appeals, including the students that she was addressing in that piece. But, Scalia himself, a few years ago in a case, recognized that to the extent that the judiciary and the executive branch exercise a certain amount of discretion, that is policy making. If what you mean by policy is that you've got choices in front of you to make decisions about what road are we going to take? How does the standard apply in this case? What standard is going to be applied in the case?
But how much leeway do they really have under the law to ask that question? Because isn't an appeals court judge supposed to look at whether the trial judge acted properly under the law? They're not supposed to say, this is really a better argument than that. That's the trial court's judge. No,
but they certainly assess whether or not the appropriate standard has been applied, and if it's a novel question, what indeed might be the response? What's the answer to that novel question? How to resolve that legal dispute? And so those cases may not walk in the door every day at the Court of Appeals, certainly may at the Supreme Court, but nevertheless there are choices that are being made, and I agree that with respect to this particular jurist, her over 15 years on the bench did not in any way suggest that you have an ideologue on either side of the spectrum who uses the law to somehow further a political agenda, an individual agenda. She is quite measured, and my colleague today is quite right. She does indeed often take a narrow approach. She goes through the facts with a fine-tooth comb.
Do you wish it was otherwise to some degree? Because, you know, there are some people who are supporters of the president who actually wish that he went further in picking someone who was sort of a liberal Scalia, who's going to make those high-concept arguments for liberal interpretations of the law, rather than what Sonia Sotomayor is known for, which is narrow legal interpretations.
Well, I think certainly we'll see how she rules, right? We'll see how she decides in these cases, and there's always the opportunity to issue a statement. She's done it on the Second Circuit, where she dissents and she thinks really the court has taken the wrong direction. So that is yet to be seen. But I don't think in the end that we as a society benefit from an extremism, that seems to push us in a direction where perhaps we don't have consensus, or perhaps we're unclear. I do believe that we need clarity about our rights under the Constitution, that they should be read expansively, and that is important, and we need to preserve those core values.
Dahlia, there is an irony that one of her narrowest rulings, maybe not expansive enough, is up for review by the U.S. Supreme Court right now, and she may well get overturned in a civil rights case that has to do with race. And it's a reverse discrimination case, so-called, where a firefighter's test in New Haven didn't get enough minorities passing it, was deemed to be biased against blacks and Latinos, blacks in particular, by the city of New Haven, and the test was voided. Some mostly white firefighter applicants who passed the test then sued for discrimination. The lower court upheld the city throwing out the test. Sotomayor, in just a paragraph, upheld throwing out the test. There was a vigorous dissent by one of her colleagues who said, you didn't even engage the issues. This is complicated stuff. Racial discrimination, reverse discrimination, where the limits are of enforcing bias. And now the Supreme Court is looking at that case, and her critics have a weapon here. They can say, look, she looked at this case where whites were the plaintiffs claiming discrimination against them, and she didn't even give it the time of day. Is there anything there?
I mean, it really is a perfect storm, because it is this case that already you can see in the right-wing blogosphere has become emblematic of Sonia Sotomayor hates white man. You know, she hates this poor dyslexic firefighter who spent all his own money to pass this test, and the test was scuttled because it didn't promote African Americans. That's just not what this case is. I commend to you, there's a great piece today on Slate by Professor Richard Ford that explains what the case is. But I think you're right. Your core point is right, Brian, which is this was a pretty minimalist decision. She upheld the district court. She was one of 3 judges on the Second Circuit who unanimously simply said, we're looking at the case law, we're looking at the statute. It appears to us that the city of New Haven has a credible claim that they were really afraid they'd be sued if they didn't scuttle the test. Whether or not the Supreme Court agrees is almost irrelevant. I think it was a fairly minimalist, modest decision.
Yeah. On the other hand, just looking at her record, there's a case where she upheld the right of a white police officer to make racist remarks without losing his job. So, you know, there's a body of
Giuliani case, yes.
4,000 cases that she's ruled on. People can find things to make arguments on either side.
If I can just add one thing on that, because you mentioned it, Dahlia, I just want to stress that. It is not an opinion that she authored. It's basically a 1-paragraph statement from the 3 judges on that panel, and they basically they basically adopted an extensive researched opinion by the trial court that really goes through the facts and the law. It's a very interesting issue, but well, it's my own opinion as a civil rights lawyer. On the merits, it's right. But we'll see. We will see.
There's one other thing that's making the rounds, being played over and over again in the mainstream press. Her quote from a speech in 2001, I would hope that a wise Latino woman, and she's taking issue here with something that Justice O'Connor said, that a wise old man and a wise old woman looking at the same case will probably come to the same conclusion. And Sotomayor said, I would hope that a wise Latino woman would reach a better conclusion, keyword better, than a white man who has not had her experiences. Is that Latina supremacy?
No, and it's another one of those beautiful statements taken out of context. I mean, if you read the entire piece, because actually in a law journal, if you read the entire piece, she was indeed discussing this very serious question of whether or not one's gender influences, as a judge, how you reach decisions, how you approach decisions, and it was actually a wonderful discourse on this issue and how difficult it is, and recognizing that in any individual case, a judge rules on the merits, and she said that herself, I rule on the case in front of me, and very clearly also stating that she works very hard to be impartial, to not bring her biases in.
To not bring her biases in.
But she has an experience, and that experience informs who she is. I suggest also, she didn't say this, but it informs the way we see people in that experience.
And that somebody who's had maybe a tougher life, a life a little bit out of the mainstream, can see both in and out of the mainstream in a more whole way than somebody who's had it at least. I mean, is that what she's arguing?
Again, she'll probably clarify that during the confirmation, but certainly in the context of what was written, you look at that and you see a judge being very candid and struggling with this issue that's on the table that began a question of gender, but certainly is now a question and has been a question of national origin and race. We're only now beginning to have enough judges who have these different kinds of backgrounds and experiences coming to the bench to say, well, let's see if we can get some data on this. But in any, as she said herself, she was not talking about any individual judge in any individual case, including herself, but whether or not if you look at a body of something, you're going to see something different.
Professor Jenny Rivera from CUNY Law School, thank you. Dahlia Lithwick from Slate.com, thank you.
Thank you.
And this is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Good thing Sonia Sotomayor is a fast reader. All those legal arguments that are hundreds of pages long. Here's how a House committee got through a lengthy global warming bill the other day.
But since we do have a speed reader, and I saw that he was practicing his speed reading, I would ask that we begin to read this amendment, but I promise you within 2 to 3 minutes I will ask to suspend the reading of the amendment.
The clerk will read the bill.
I want the speed reader to read the bill, not
the speed reader clerk will read the bill. Before you begin the reading, have you been practicing the reading of this particular amendment?
I just got it a couple minutes ago.
Did you look it over?
This version of it.
Did you look it over? This version of it?
I went over it a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I want him to read in a Texas accent.
In lieu of the matter proposed to be inserted by me.
Okay. Yeah, let's have order. The amendment offered by Mr. Borton is before us, and rather than ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading, the rules require that the amendment be read. The clerk will read the bill.
In lieu of the matter proposed to be inserted by the amendment offered by blank, insert the following: Section 1, short title.
Now listen to it.
Short title. The Act may be cited as the Energy Production, Innovation, and Conservation Act. B, table of contents. Table of contents for the Act is as follows. Section 1, short title and table of contents. Title 1, Clean Energy Standards. Section 101, Federal Clean Energy Standard. Title 2, American Energy. Subtitle A, Conservation and Efficiency. Chapter 1, Tapping America's Ingenuity and Creativity. Section 201, Definitions. Section 202, Statement of Policy. Section 203, Price Authority. Section 204, Eligibility.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that the reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
That rare bit of congressional comic relief came to us via C-SPAN. This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Now, Memorial Day is over. We honored the war dead. But what about the living? 30,000 servicemen and women have been wounded in Iraq and Afghanistan. By some accounts, 10 times that number have come home with psychological trauma. And countless more have TBI, that's traumatic brain injuries. What is TBI exactly? Well, check out this web video posted on a U.S. Army site.
You see it happen right in front of you.
The war in Iraq is creating a new generation of disabled veterans.
Welcome to freaking Iraq. Huh? How am I supposed to tell somebody I just got done fighting a war and now I can't read, and now I can't write as well, or I can't talk as well.
It took the Army almost 3 years to understand what happened to Chad Joyner's brain after a roadside bomb left him unconscious in a Humvee in Iraq.
My speech wasn't the same. I couldn't write too well. I couldn't read too well. I didn't know what was wrong.
Doctors diagnosed Chad with traumatic brain injury and possible post-traumatic stress disorder.
After I got hit, then I lost my best friend, and then a week later I lost 4 more, and then, you know, once that started happening, it was just kind of like, I'm not the same, I'm losing friends, and it's just like, everything's just started to go out of control.
Of course, the Veterans Administration does the most for injured vets, but sometimes it doesn't adapt quickly. Private groups are often on the front lines, reaching out to young vets via the web. Joining us, Maggie Haynes, who manages the combat stress recovery programs at a group called the Wounded Warrior Project, and a remarkable young woman named Julie Zucker. She used Facebook to help raise a small fortune for vets with TBI, then sent the funds to Remind, the TBI group founded by journalist Bob Woodruff. Welcome, both of you. Thank you very much for coming to the show. Tell us more about the Wounded Warrior Project.
Absolutely. The Wounded Warrior Project was founded in 2003. Its central mission is to honor and empower this generation of veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. And our goal is to make this the most well-adjusted generation of veterans in our history.
And how do you do that?
Well, we listen. We spend a lot of time listening and providing opportunities for veterans to connect to one another. And through that process, we're able to learn where we need to fill in the gaps. The Veterans Administration, as you mentioned, provides the services and state-of-the-art technology that meets a lot of the veterans' needs. But often we provide support for the families, for the veterans in non-traditional ways and innovative programming that we have been able to put up in response to some of the injuries that we've seen coming back, including, like you said, the traumatic brain injury and the post-traumatic stress disorder.
And the web helps with this in a way that wouldn't have been possible before it?
Absolutely. We are actually developing an online combat stress program, which will start with a social networking site that allows a connection among warriors, our staff, and their families, and then also allows the warrior to do a self-assessment, see what some triggers of combat stress might be. Our idea there is that we have to speak the language of this generation of veterans, and often that is through the web, especially when there's the stigma of seeking treatment, particularly among this group, and also barriers to care, such as many of our veterans living in rural parts of the country.
Julie, how do you use the web?
I've mostly used it to reach out to my friends and to get them joining the Facebook group for the Bob Woodruff Foundation. And, you know, I'm constantly updating my status, you know, saying donate to Tweet to Remind. I really just hope that, you know, people don't, like, they totally, like, regard it and they don't just brush it off, and, you know, they are actually participating when they see it.
Tell me again, donate to
tweet-to-remind.org.
Tweet to Remind. So tweet refers to a comment that you make on the Twitter site.
Right.
Tweet to, and Remind is the name of the group.
Right.
Right. So let me take a pause here, because here's a video from the group Remind. Take a short look at what they do.
Where are you exactly? Do you remember when you got hit?
I was in Taji.
In Taji? Sounds familiar to me.
This is not about the war. It's about the warriors, brothers, sisters, families, fighting every day to recover. Stick together, we got 100%.
Exactly.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, of course, is about Bob Woodruff, traumatic brain injuries, and soldiers in Iraq. Now, if that's not a recipe for comedy, I don't know what is.
So Conan at the end, and you may have recognized Bob Woodruff, the ABC News correspondent, at the beginning of that video. correspondent who was, an anchor who was wounded in Iraq. So how do your friends react to this? You tell them you're doing this and they go, what war? You want me to give, I don't have money, or what? How do they react?
At first, they're like, I don't have money, can you ask me tomorrow? And I do come back the next day and I ask them, and it's just a constant reminder to them. And
how come? Are you with a personal connection to this?
Yes. Several years ago, my cousin who was a Vietnam War veteran committed suicide, and it makes me think about it every single day, that maybe if a program like this existed and was able to help him, that maybe he'd still be alive today. And it makes me really question that.
That's really good that you're doing that. And people who might have been killed in past wars, who we might have been remembering on Monday, Memorial Day, are alive in great numbers today because of medical technology, but they have these injuries, correct? There's almost like a new category of war vet.
Absolutely. The nature of the IEDs and the type of warfare that we're experiencing in Iraq and Afghanistan has presented us with a lot of injuries that we've had to quickly adapt to and provide new technology and new programming for. So on one hand, we're so grateful for them to be here, but on the other hand, we need to move quickly in order to make sure that their families and the hospitals and their caregivers have the resources that they need to help them.
Why can a group like yours adapt more quickly than the Veterans Administration? Isn't that their job?
Well, we don't have all the red tape. So we are able to meet the needs from our warriors directly, and we don't have to spend a lot of time getting things passed because we have the generous support of the American public. And we definitely work in tandem with the VA, and we respond and listen to them and communicate to them, but we also work independently in terms of our programming.
And you have a background doing this kind of web outreach in a former life, right?
Yes. During my master's work, we were looking at online programs, ways to reach out to trauma victims since they're often marginalized in their homes, and coming from a rural part of Illinois where mental health services are not readily available, I was looking for different ways that I could take some of my clinical experience and spread the wealth, in a sense, and make sure that we're reaching out to those that may not be able to get traditional mental health services. And that has evolved into the development of the online combat stress program at Wounded Warrior Project.
What questions? Why would they answer a web questionnaire doing a kind of self-assessment?
Sure. Well, when you wake up at 4 a.m., you can't sleep. You're experiencing some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. You feel hyper-vigilant, on alert. You're looking for someone to talk to. You maybe don't feel comfortable speaking to your family members or your friends about what you're experiencing. You may turn to the web. You may disclose things that you wouldn't typically face-to-face, and I think we all can kind of realize that some things that are said over the web or on the internet or on Facebook or MySpace, we wouldn't necessarily say to someone face-to-face. So the internet allows us to reach out and give the warriors a channel for this communication that's sometimes difficult to say.
Sometimes people really regret saying things on Facebook that they wouldn't have said face-to-face, and it comes back to haunt them. In this case, it's an opportunity. What you got there, Julie?
I have a set of dog tags and rings, and I actually sold these in my lunch periods during school for $2, and I've raised close to $200 with these just by selling these and asking for small donations. And I was actually wondering if you wanted to buy one.
Let's see. It's dog tags that represent a donation to Remind.
Exactly.
You're on.
Oh,
there you go.
Thank you so much.
And where do you go from here? Do you work for an end to the war? Do you try to minimize these injuries, or you just take people as they come?
Well, once this war concludes, the battle, I think, will continue for many of the warriors and their families. So we as an organization respond and listen and be there as a support. As Julie mentioned, the previous conflicts still live on, and the tragedy that we see there definitely doesn't go away. So it will be necessary for all of us to do what we can to support the warriors and really welcome them home in a way that you may not be able to imagine right now, but is possible just by putting your heart into it and being there as a support for those that serve our country.
Who funds you, by the way, besides her?
The American public. So we're proud to say we spend 83 cents on a dollar of our fundraising to our programming, and it's all private donations.
All right, there we go. I'm on board.
All right.
Thank you both very much for coming in. Good luck to you. Continue your important work. This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Coming up, information overload makes us not hyper, well, maybe that too, but superficial.
This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Did you know that there are 8 national parks in New York City? There are also 8 parking spaces in New York City. But that's something else. New York City has Federal Hall, where George Washington became our first president, the Statue of Liberty, and Gateway with beautiful beaches and protected wildlife. New York City has a range of national parks you won't find anywhere else, because you cannot move a national park. It's a park. Even if you wanted to get it out of here, you couldn't. America's spirit lives in our national parks.
Ma, guess what? I went back to college. No, I didn't quit my job. I'm finishing my degree with a CUNY Online Bachelor's in Business. I interact online with real City University of New York faculty on a schedule that fits my busy life. Ma, you should look who's teaching at CUNY. And it all leads to a high-quality Bachelor of Science degree in business. I can attend class anywhere, anytime. Yes, Mom, even at your house Friday night for dinner.
The CUNY Online Baccalaureate. Get back to business.
This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Are you drowning in emails, texts, Twitters? Are you filtering your electronic life so your day has some focus and some depth? Not easy. Joining me tonight to discuss the possibilities and limits in harnessing your attention in this age of increasing distraction are 2 guests. Winifred Gallagher, author of the book Wrapped, Attention and the Focused Life, and Dr. Charles Schroeder from the Cognitive Neuroscience and Schizophrenia Program at the Nathan S. Klein Institute of Psychiatric Research in Orangeburg, New York. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for coming in. Charles, biologically speaking, what is a distraction?
Oh, well, I think it's only really with reference to what you're paying attention to. So if you're focused on something and your brain is entrained to it, a distraction is something that takes you away from the focus of your attention.
Simple enough. Winifred, you come to this through a route that's unusual, not just tweeting and texting and stuff like that, but through a much more intense personal experience, correct?
Yes. About 5 years ago, I came down with a very nasty and aggressive case of breast cancer. And rather suddenly, I had a very clear insight walking away from the hospital that this negative event, as psychologists call it, could very easily just monopolize my entire focus. I could just get sucked down into this.
I am cancer.
Yeah, or yeah, I could die. My 5 children could be mother. The whole business. And I saw very clearly that for however long I had left, which at that point was uncertain, I wanted to move onward with my life instead. So I would pick my medical team. I was not in denial. I would pick great doctors, and I'd sort of give my body over to them. And the rest of the time, I would concentrate on finishing my book, taking care of my kids, doing my yoga practice, having friends for dinner. And at the end of 7 months of very intense treatment, I was amazed at how well it worked. And I said, there's something to this attention business. I want to do some research because my specialty is behavioral science. And I started with the neuroscience of attention that Charles is an expert in, and worked my way all the way through the behavioral aspects of it. And I believe, I really do strongly believe, I sound like I've drunk the Kool-Aid, but I do believe that learning to use your attention skillfully can improve virtually every aspect of your life.
Why do we tend to focus on the negative?
We evolved to focus on the negative.
We evolved
for the very good reason that if something upsets you, you're inclined to do something about it. So if your child is sick, the anxiety you feel causes you to call the doctor. It causes you to solve the problem. If you have a falling out with a friend, the upset you feel causes you to make amends. So in those cases, paying attention to negative stuff makes sense because it's moving the ball forward, solving the problem. Unfortunately, we spend an awful lot of time on negative thoughts and feelings that don't have problem-solving purpose. So, for example, in my own situation, I could have been in this. I could have spent 7 months thinking, "What if I die? Who will take care of the kid?" Those issues didn't really have any practical purpose to them. So I found, as William James, our hero, my hero, says, "My experience is what I agree to attend to."
What a great quote!
It's a fabulous quote, and it's a very Jamesian idea that you can shift. You have the power to shift your attention from one focus to another.
Speak the quote again.
My experience is what I agree to attend to.
And that was 100 years ago.
Yes.
So what does this have to do with Twitter and Facebook?
Well, I'm neither a Twitter nor a Facebook book person, but I think the thing that is kind of the counterpoint to the idea that you need to really focus and you need to really latch onto something and give it your full attention is the fact that there are so many distractions, and Twitter and Facebook are two of them. We all see them all the time, and in terms of the way the brain operates when you're attending, what it actually literally does is entrains. It finds a rhythm in something that you're doing, and there are rhythms everywhere.
But why do you write them off as distractions? I tweet, and when I tweet, I'm very focused on what I'm writing to
so then it's not a distraction.
Be meaningful in 140 characters.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's not a distraction if that's what you're really focusing on. But if you're actually trying to write something and you're being brought up by your little bell of your instant message or something like that.
You keep checking your IM and you keep checking your Twitter.
You lose time, you lose focus, and you're much less effective under those circumstances.
Now, I don't know if either of you go this far, but let's take a look at a not so serious look at the downside of information overload syndrome. Here's how bad it might get.
As we speak, business people everywhere are battling a mysterious psychoneurological condition, one that can only be described as disturbing.
Donna was Employee of the Month just last month. It now seems so long ago. 6 months after Sarah got her job, she started taking her smartphone into the bathroom with her. 6 months after that, she forgot where the bathroom was. They all suffer from iOS, information overload syndrome. iOS affects millions of people across the country.
A normal human brain can retain enormous amounts of information. But a business person's brain is attacked by 281 exabytes of quote-unquote pertinent information every year.
Exabytes?
That's 18 zeros worth of emails, attachments, presentations, voicemails, thought starters, FYIs, and caveats. And it's growing, 30% a year. To make room for this new information, the brain is forced to delete all the old data it spent a lifetime compiling. So the very information meant to inform us is actually making us stupid. First, everyday sights and sounds begin to feel unfamiliar. Then muscle memory is affected.
Hey, Ed, how are you?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Finally, survival skills disappear.
So, Winifred, is this where we're headed if we don't turn off our machines?
That's very amusing. I think the crucial thing here is whether you're in control of your machines or your machines are in control of you. I'm not a Luddite, and I know Charles is not a Luddite. I have a BlackBerry. I love my Macintosh computer. It's a matter of, however, I disabled the little I've got mail voice in my machine because I want to pick when I check my email. I have a lawnmower, but I don't let it tell me when to cut the grass. So it's a matter of being in charge of your own machines. If you enjoy Twittering and doing all those things, then that's fine. It's not a distraction.
It's filtering. It's you making conscious decisions how to filter all the information sources that you want some access to.
Well, and also realizing something about the quality of your experience. What kind of experience are you having? How deep is that experience if you're all day long, you know, doing this and that? My favorite example is, I think, a year or two ago in Japan, the top 10 best-selling novels in Japan, 5 of them were written by young women on their cell phones. Do you think it was War and Peace? I don't think so. So there's the level of, like, what are we giving up to get all the superficial stuff that, you know, every time you answer an email or a telephone call when you're trying to, let's say, write something, it can take your brain up to 20 minutes to reboot. You're losing all this nuance.
But is this a generational view? Because, you know, there are 18-year-olds watching right now who are thinking, come on, give me a break. Is it even possible that ADD is evolution rather than aberration?
So in some environments, being distractible is a good idea. And in fact, either extreme, being too distractible, that results in a syndrome like ADD, or being too focused, that results in perseveration, which is another type of disorder. Either one of those extremes is bad. You have to have the ability to focus when you need to focus, and you have to have the ability to detach from the focus when necessary.
Now, NYU professor Clay Shirky, who likes to think a lot about technology and distraction, thinks that it may not be the tools that are the problem. Let's watch.
This is more of a mental shift, right? It's a way of seeing the world that assumes that we are to information overload as fishes are to water. It's just what we swim in. Yitzhak Rabin, a man who would know, once said, if you have the same problem for a long time, maybe it's not a problem. Maybe it's a fact, right? That's information overload. Talking about it, and especially talking about it as if it explains or excuses anything, is actually a distraction. Right? We've had information overload in some form or other since the 1500s. What's changing now is the filters we used for most of that 500-year period are breaking. And designing new filters doesn't mean simply updating the old filters. They've broken for structural reasons, not for sort of surface reasons. Right? Now, some of this is going to be, in some situations, this will be a simple matter of programming, as they say. Right? Certainly the pressure to get this right has led to an enormous number of sort of post-categorical filtering mechanisms. It's why dig voting mechanisms work. It's why delicious tags work. It is the logic behind all search engines. Right? But some of it is not. Some of it is actually going to be around rethinking social norms, right? When you feel yourself getting too much information, I think the discipline is not to say to yourself, what's happened to the information, but rather, what filter just broke? What was I relying on before that stopped functioning?
We just have a couple of minutes, but that last question, instead of too much information, what filter broke? Is that a meaningful question to you? He's putting it on us.
So I think, once again, it's not a matter of either or. Filtering is part of attention. It's a key part of attention. Bob Desimone's theory holds that in a central position. For example, the ability to focus on an object of attention and to amplify it is the other side of it. So there's amplification and there's filtering, and your brain does both. They're both part of the process.
So last thing, you said you do yoga. And we found you through the excellent New York Magazine cover story on distraction last week, in which they say neuroscientists have become obsessed in recent years with Buddhists, whose attentional discipline can apparently confer all kinds of benefits, even on non-Buddhists. And their point was, Buddhists get so focused that they're natural multitaskers. You would think it was the opposite.
I've never heard that. Some of my best friends are Buddhists. That's something, the idea that this sets you up as a multitasker, I think the whole point of Buddhist meditation is to calm and still your mind and to keep you focused on a single target. It's an attentional regimen that we could all use. The same way we go to the gym, we could do 20 minutes of cognitive training, single-pointed focus, and then do another 20 minutes of another Buddhist practice that works an effective channel where you think about universal good feelings, kindness towards everyone, and give your attentional circuitry a workout. I think that kind of cognitive trip to the gym is in our future. But this idea that it sets you up to be some sort of a multitasker, that seemed a little dubious to me.
In a sense, though, they have different practices in Buddhism and or in meditation in general. Some of them are very rhythmic, and some of them are very steady. And that's actually a metaphor for attention as well, because we are constantly switching between different modes of attention. And it's a little recognized fact that most of life is actually much more rhythmic than non-rhythmic. Even looking at a static picture, our eye movement patterns that we use to drink in the picture occur at about 3 per second. That's a very strong rhythm, and that's a constant rhythm in our vision.
And if you get in touch with that rhythm, if you can move in tune with that rhythm, there are breathing exercises like that too. People
Absolutely.
have natural breathing cycles.
Absolutely.
And if you can do that, then you're going to make yourself more relaxed and more focused. So advice for people who are finding themselves too distracted?
Take charge of your machines. They work for you. You don't work for them. Don't let them decide when you're going to interact with them. If you need to protect your experience, you need to write something or do some kind of serious work, give yourself about 90 minutes. Try to work, turn the machines off, work without interruption. And remember that every time you get distracted, you can take you up to 20 minutes to reboot. So shepherd your resources. Protect the quality of your experience.
Thank you both very much. A lot of people are thinking about this and trying to manage it in their own lives. And that's it for this week's show. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30 or anytime online at brianlehrer.tv. And tune into my daily radio show, 10 a.m. on WNYC Radio. Tomorrow morning, Andrew Sullivan, the blogger from The Atlantic, on Sotomayor and Proposition 8. That's 10 a.m. on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Have a great night.